Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Elisa Holder, and I am Director of Business Partnerships for the Center for Services Leadership. And I want to welcome everybody to our webinar on moving from firefighting to prevention using the voice of the customer. And today we've got John Goodman, who is the Vice Chairman at Customer Care Measurement and Consulting. And John, thanks for taking time out of your very busy schedule to join us today.
My pleasure.
And it's always fun to work with John. We'll be talking about this in a second, but we're going to be having with us at our symposium November 6th through 8th in downtown Phoenix. This is a little bit of a preview of the work that you'll be sharing with us there. And before we get into this session, I want to just share a little bit about who's hosting it, in case you're joining us from a different website. And this event is hosted by the ASU Center for Services Leadership. And just very briefly, we are part of the W.P. Carey School of Business at Arizona State University, one of the school's several research centers. And we were founded in 1985 to bring together the world of academics and the world of services, and the world of business around the study of services. So it's great to have a thought leader like John with us to share some of the new cutting-edge things that are going on in the world of services. And before we have John take over, I just want to give him a quick intro. John has been a pioneer in the world of services since his times in the 1970s when he was involved in a breakthrough study of consumer complaint behavior and customer service for the White House Office of Consumer Affairs. And the work he did there led to the widespread use of 1-800 numbers. And, well, things have changed a lot since then, but John has kept pace, and he's remained a trailblazer in the customer experience industry. He has a new book out called Strategic Customer Service, and after this webinar, I know you're going to want to go out there and get it. And also, there's a new one coming out this spring called Customer Experience 3.0. So you want to be on the lookout for that as well. He has worked with 40 of the Fortune 100 companies, various voice of the customer issues. And in addition to this webinar, he did another one for us last spring, so you can go back to the website and download that. And as I mentioned before, he's going to be at our symposium, which will be November 6th to the 8th, 2013, at the Marriott in Renaissance in downtown Phoenix. So I'm looking forward to be able to see John in person, not just his handsome picture here for the session and symposium. So John, I'll let you go ahead and take it over from here.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Alicia. Basically, we have found that the whole customer service profession really has now evolved into customer experience management. And 86% of senior executives now say the customer experience is one of their top priorities. The challenge that the service industry has is not only to measure that and manage the overall customer experience, but also to find the resources to do that management. And one of the challenges is that you're busy fighting the fire of day-to-day contact handling, and we have found that across all industries, about 30% of all contacts are preventable, and that's one of the big opportunities, is if you can reduce those preventable contacts, you free up resources, but you can also then start addressing the problems you don't hear about. So this webinar is really going to be focusing on how do you get out of firefighting and move to proactivity and prevention, and then how do you get the resources you need from the finance organization to manage the voice of the customer. At the end, I'm going to also ask you to grade your voice of the customer operation to identify what your biggest opportunities are. Now, our basic approach to customer experience is pretty straightforward. In fact, one of my staff was asked, aren't you embarrassed to be selling common sense? And she had, I thought, a good answer, which was there still seems to be a market for it in some places. Now, ideally, you want to do the job right the first time. And this is where most organizations get into trouble because they define quality as we delivered the product according to spec, which makes eminently good sense except for one minor difficulty called customers who do stupid things, fail to read, and it's now to the point where Sharp Electronics has a red block card on the top of the box that says when all else fails, try reading the directions. I'm an engineer, so I never read the directions, and I therefore get myself into trouble. The second piece of the puzzle is to provide the customer access to the service system. Now, most organizations feel that that means we answer the phone fast. Well, there's a prerequisite, which is the vast majority of customers who are befuddled or have problems with your product never contact you about it. They just go away angry and spread negative word of mouth. So the first part of the access strategy is communicating to the customer base we can only solve problems we know about. It's what I call aggressively soliciting complaints. The third piece of the puzzle is to have the effective contact management system in place. And my criticism of most of those organizations that have a good system is that they spend almost all their time responding to the individual customer and less than 2% saying, why are we getting all these calls? To the degree that you have that allocation of resources, you have forever doomed yourself to be in a firefighting mode. So what we're going to be really talking about today is how do you do it right the first time more often, and how do you really make that feedback loop robust to use the voice of the customer to both improve your operations within the contact center, but also to fix the rest of the organization. And if you play your cards right, I would argue you can parlay that voice of the customer process into becoming either the informal or formal chief customer officer, which is where I think most of you should be. Now, we're going to be building on 6 basic ideas from the book Strategic Customer Service, which, by the way, is available on Amazon for less than $20. The first idea is that staff do not cause most customer dissatisfaction. Sales, products, processes, and customers do. And we'll go into this in more detail in a minute. Secondly, it's cheaper to give really great service than just good service. We find that the revenue payoff of great service is 10 to 20 times what you have to invest to improve service. And you can demonstrate that to the finance people. Thirdly, an effective voice of the customer system includes all kinds of data, not just complaints and surveys. Fourth, people are still paramount, but you need to make the front line successful. And the 2 big things that the front line lacks in most organizations is flexibility and clear, believable explanations for why you do what you do. And to the degree that you can provide those 2 tools to your front line, you will see your first contact resolution go up by at least 10 points. The fifth idea is you have to deliver technology that customers will enjoy. When everybody talks about technology with customer service, the first thing they talk about are phone trees. And Tom Peters did an interview with me many years ago entitled Push 1, Push 2, Push 3, Push Your Customer Over the Edge. Phone trees drive people nuts. On the other hand, if you use technology to deliver what I call psychic pizza, which is I ring your doorbell and I say, here is the pizza you are about to order, and I dazzle you by anticipating your need, technology then can really delight the customer, which then leads to delight. Many organizations have a stated corporate goal of we want to continuously exceed customer expectations. We think that's a dumb idea because in many cases when people talk about delight, they then talk about Nordstrom's taking back tires when they don't sell tires, which actually did happen once, but if you do that systematically, you're going to go out of business because it's wildly expensive. So we suggest that you sensibly create remarkable delight. In other words, do cheap delighters. And I'll talk about that briefly in a few minutes. So those are the 6 ideas we're going to be building on. Now, we find most service organizations are focused on handling complaints and problems, and it's the top of this iceberg. The problem is if that's all you focus on, you're really not dealing with the big opportunities, and you're leaving a lot of money on the table. The next level down are the grumbles and gripes that go to retailers in the field, and our research shows that if somebody complains to your channel or your retailer, in many cases their loyalty to you is significantly decreased because the retailer or the field organization always throws you under the bus. So we find on average there's a 20% drop in loyalty if somebody goes to your channel versus coming to you. And that's been one of the big impetuses for creation of corporate 800 numbers and high visibility service systems. We don't trust the field or our retailers to handle things. The next level down is when you are dealing with someone, can you create an emotional connection with them so you take the transaction from being bland to being remarkable and memorable. And then the final opportunity, and this is one of the biggest ones, and we'll show you some math on what the implications are, is to go after those who've had a problem or are befuddled that have been silent. That's where the really big money is. Now, in terms of looking at the evolution of service systems, in the 2000s, service systems were primarily customer contact systems, the complaint center. They did some customer education for call and warranty cost avoidance. They were the office of the president. They reported the number of contacts to other organizations, and on occasion, they provided some assistance to the regulatory liaison. The service system of 2015 is very different. That service system is now the focal point of the voice of the customer. Customer contacts are recognized as word-of-mouth management mechanisms, and word-of-mouth on the web is managed and measured. Customer experience management is now the name of the game, and in many cases people are the chief customer officer, and they're looked upon as being a major source of innovation. Also, in many cases, this executive is coordinating or managing the quality, the warranty, risk, regulatory relations, and even website content. And the companies who are really doing well in that include companies like ConAgra, Kellogg, Pepsi-Cola, Cisco Systems, Moan, Bath & Body Works, and Wegmans. These guys aren't perfect, but they have moved very much toward this service system of 2015. Now, how does the service system become the focal point of the voice of the customer? You have to take different kinds of data beyond surveys and contact data. And this includes looking at your internal operations data, which very few organizations really look at as a voice of the customer data source. And let me use Federal Express as an example. FedEx knows 10 hours before you do that the package isn't going to arrive because it missed a flight in Memphis. Then they get the frantic phone call. Then 2 days later, they do the satisfaction survey. So the point I'm making is that all three of those types of data, the operations data saying, oops, it missed the flight, the call and the survey are all describing the same set of events. Some of them are leading indicators, some of them are lagging indicators. Also, your frontline employees can not only tell you when stuff happens, but they can tell you in many cases the root cause of it. The customer didn't understand this. This process breaks down in this circumstance. You need to take all those types of data and roll them into a unified picture of the customer experience, and then quantify what is the cost for each month we don't fix the issue. If you can quantify the cost of inaction, you precipitate action. That then allows you to take on the role of Chief Customer Officer, which is where most of you should be aspiring. Now, what are the key requirements to have an effective voice of the customer process? There are 8 of them. First, you have to have a well-defined ownership. One person has to run the voice of the customer. In most companies, when I go in, I say, who owns the voice of the customer? And the answer is, well, 4 or 5 different people have pieces of it. If 5 people have pieces of it, nobody owns it and nobody's accountable. And no one really has the ability to then do step 2, which is create a unified data collection plan for across the entire customer lifecycle. If the data is collected as apples, oranges, and kumquats, you've got a very hard time doing step 3, which is integrating the multiple data sources into a unified picture. And unless you have a unified picture of the customer experience, everybody gravitates to the picture that makes them look best, and you have multiple realities, and it's impossible to make decisions. You have to have visible, granular, actionable reporting. To say we have billing issues is not actionable. To say this late charge gets imposed incorrectly 1,000 times a month, that's something that's actionable. You then have to be able to translate that into a clear estimate of the revenue and profit implications. For each month we don't fix this, here's how much it's costing us. Then translate that into processes and actions with targets. If we do this, we expect the needle to move this amount. And by the way, here is the organization that should be taking the lead. A critical part of the voice of the customer process is to address cross-functional activities where there are 3 functions involved, and the VOC process has to designate who should be taking the lead. If everybody's doing it as a group project, no one's accountable. The 7th factor is something we see in very few voice of the customer processes, which is asking the question, did the issue actually get fixed? Did the fix work? We find most organizations don't ask that question because they're afraid of the answer. And then finally, In really good companies, it's the voice of the customer response is associated with incentives. Now, before one can move from firefighting to prevention, you need to understand some basic customer behavior. The first behavior is the tip of the iceberg phenomenon, which simply says that when customers have problems, the vast majority don't complain to you. Many of them complain to your local channel, but in many cases, only 1 or 2% complain to you at headquarters. So for each complaint you get, there's between 20 and 200 others out there, and this is called the multiplier. For each one we get, how many other similar issues are out there in the field that we aren't hearing about. Now, why don't people complain? Basically, there are 4 reasons. It's too much trouble. It won't do any good. This is what we call trade hopelessness. I'm afraid of retribution. If I complain, bad things are going to be done to me. If you've seen the Seinfeld episode where Elaine complains in the doctor's office, she is then labeled a troubled patient and is never given another appointment. People don't want to be labeled as the troubled customer, and I don't know where to complain. So we basically find for each issue that you're hearing in the service system, there are normally between 20 and 200 similar issues out there in the marketplace you're not hearing about.
Now, Jan, what does this look like in the B2B space or nonprofit space?
Well, what's interesting is we find customer behavior is not that dissimilar, even in B2B environments. We work in large financial services, aerospace, and even when people are buying $100 million aircraft, in many cases, they don't complain about the legal team or the contracting process because, well, that's the way you guys do it. I just have to live with it. So what we find is that in many cases, people in B2B environments don't complain. Also, we find that one of the most egregious areas is in dealing with a field sales rep. I don't want to complain about my sales rep because I got to do business with that person next month. And so we find in many cases people are afraid to complain. Very much the same thing in nonprofits, and we also find expectations are lower in nonprofit environments. People don't really expect great service because you're just a flaky nonprofit to begin with.
Yeah, a lot of nonprofits out there definitely working to avoid that and really want those complaints. And I can see in a B2B where it's almost the same kind of, to create that same kind of atmosphere you have with internal complaining inside your own organization, where you're worried that there's going to be retribution or it's what can I do about it? I'm in this huge contract that we can't get out of anyway. Right?
Yeah, and in fact what we find is, not picking on anybody in particular, but we find that the IT department is most hated in most organizations, but people are afraid to complain because next time I have a problem, you won't come and help me. Let's move on. Now, social media has supposedly dramatically changed the landscape. I'm not so sure. And here's a profile of a recent complaint I ran into. I was having lunch with a producer from the Discovery Channel who had found something icky in her kid's cereal the day before. She'd sent an email with no photo, didn't hear anything for 24 hours. She then called the 800 number after she got home from work, and it was closed. Then she went to the Facebook page and posted a picture of the rat droppings she had found in her child's cereal. Now, in fact, I've worked with enough food companies, it wasn't rat droppings, it was burned product. But my point is, she had tried twice to complain, sending an email with no response, called the 800 number, it was closed. So she didn't go social until she'd already taken 2 bites at the apple. And what we find is that really people in the United States don't go social until they've given the company 1 or 2 tries. On the other hand, we've done a study recently in Argentina where we found that everybody in Argentina is basically a closet Italian, and 25% of them immediately go social when they have a problem. So, and we've done another study in Japan where we find that people are very reticent to go social. Again, that people don't like public conflict. So, in the United States, for the most part, people don't go social until they've given you a chance and you've flubbed it. Okay, let's move on to understand the causes of dissatisfaction. And again, a long time ago, I said 30% of all workload is preventable. What is the cause of most customer dissatisfaction? Most people assume if you have a dissatisfied customer, some employee must have done something wrong, and if we can identify who that person is and have a public hanging, life will then be beautiful. We disagree with that. We find that employees come to work wanting to do a good job, and at maximum, 20% of dissatisfaction and problems are caused by employees. Customers cause another 20 to 30%, and my favorite example is a well-known bleach manufacturer who gets not a complaint but a helpful suggestion once a month. Why don't you make your bleach taste better? A specific suggestion is cherry flavor. People brush their teeth with it. It does whiten your teeth. It also whitens your esophagus, what it does for your brain.
Oh, that's scary.
So people do stupid things, but the company's job is to save the customer from themselves. But 40 to 60% of all dissatisfaction is where unpleasant surprises are built into the product or service. And this is where if you have any fine print or a complicated user's manual, you have built unpleasant surprises into it. I was working with one of the big auto companies, and the CEO really wanted to improve service, and I said, okay, you have a 100,000-mile bumper-to-bumper warranty, which is wonderful, but it has 17 footnotes. There are exclusions. The battery is 3 years. The tires are not included. So if you really are serious about this, you will eliminate all the footnotes. The general counsel started hyperventilating at that point. But the basic point is that anytime you have fine print or complicated products, you are building problems into your system. And if you can warn the customer about the 2 or 3 dumbest things that they will run into and help them avoid those, you can reduce your workload. And again, we have found that 30% of all contacts are preventable if you just identify the top 3 to 5 things that customers do that get them into trouble and warn them in advance. Now, how do you use the voice of the customer in the contact center to enhance your effectiveness? Point 1 is that you need to understand what the objectives of your frontline staff are. In most organizations, that objective is first contact resolution. There should be 4 other objectives in their job description. They should cross-sell and upsell when appropriate. That's in a lot of job descriptions. They should do education to prevent future contacts. I'm going to come back to that. They should also create an emotional connection when appropriate. I'll touch on that briefly. And they also have a job to make input into the voice of the customer to allow you to build the business case that the CFO accepts. I would guess that most of the people listening to this webinar do not have the 3 latter job functions in the job description of their frontline CSRs. It should be there. And in fact, the quality process metrics you should be applying to your frontline and your contact center should include a lot of non-standard ones. This is a slide that I presented with Janet Bailey from Starbucks a while back. And basically, for access, you shouldn't just look at hold time, you should look at the tail of the hold time. How long are people having to wait? Are people using the virtual queue? Also, if people are using the IVR, the Interactive Voice Response System, what is the opt-out rate and what are the errors they are making? For first contact resolution, you should be asking what's the FCR by type of contact and by channel used. If all you know is that you're achieving an 80%, what are the 20% of calls that aren't being resolved on first contact? That's really the question you want to answer. You need to know what type of contacts those are that are not being resolved on first contact. Are your staff providing clear explanations? We have found that if the answer to the customer's question is no, or gee, we really can't do that, you have to provide them with a clear, believable explanation as to why you can't do it that leaves them feeling treated fairly. If you can do that, we find you can say no to the customer and still retain his loyalty. My favorite example is if the airline pilot gets on and says we have a 1-hour delay due to a mechanical, there are a bunch of follow-ups. On the other hand, if he says we have a leak in the hydraulic system, everyone says, I want a good hydraulic system. I'll take an extra 30 minutes if necessary. So the clear explanation is more important to the customer than the actual outcome. Now, customers aren't madly happy, but they're dramatically less unhappy. Accuracy, cross-sell attempts, those are pretty straightforward metrics. The next thing you should be evaluating your front line on is, are they doing proactive education and are they attempting to to create emotional connections. Not on every call, but you could say for 20% of the calls, I want you to do proactive education. Whenever somebody asks a dumb question, educate them on something so that we don't get the next phone call from them. At Hewlett-Packard, they found that for every 2 minutes spent doing that kind of education, they saved 10 minutes of subsequent phone calls from that client. In terms of another very actionable kind of data you can capture, a number of companies are now creating just a checkbox on the screen where they ask the rep, was this contact preventable? Just check it off anytime you think this trip really wasn't necessary. That will give you a universe of calls that after the fact you can do an analysis on to say how could we have prevented that call. So if you really want to prevent 30% of all the contacts coming in, you need to have a universe. Just simply gather this one piece of data. Ask your reps, was this call preventable in your opinion? Could this have been prevented? And all of a sudden you'll have a great universe where you'll be able to find your 30%. Also, are reps taking the time to make input into prevention and voice of the customer? In many cases, they haven't been told it's their job, but even if it is, a lot of them say, well, there's no point in doing that because nobody's really paying attention. You have to give feedback at least every 2 weeks on here's what we've heard in the voice of the customer process, and here's what we're doing about it. And then finally, you need to have a correlation between your monitoring, your call quality monitoring, and your surveys and your first contact resolution outcomes. If the monitoring says Mary Lou is doing a wonderful job, the customer survey says she's not doing such a great job, and you're having a bunch of repeat phone calls, there is something wrong with your metrics. You should have a very high correlation between the monitoring scores, the survey scores, and the FCR outcomes. So hopefully I've given you here about a half a dozen non-standard metrics that you should apply to move from firefighting into a preventive mode. What are the keys to improving complaint operations? Basically, what we find is the first thing you have to do is empower the front line, and that means eliminate supervisor involvement. Anytime that a rep has to go to a supervisor to get approval, you have doubled or tripled the cost of that transaction, and you've also done damage to customer satisfaction. I always ask supervisors, when the reps come for approval, how often do you not approve the action? And in many cases, it's, oh, I almost always do. Well, if you're always approving it, why are you taking everybody's time? If the approval rate is over 80%, my suggestion is stop making the reps go to the supervisor. Let them do what they think is best, and then do a retrospective review and do the correction on an ad hoc basis when necessary. The second big opportunity for empowerment is to provide the reps with flexible solution spaces. Now, this concept came from a conversation I had with the head of customer experience at American Express about 5 years ago, where he said, I wish we could just get the front line to be willing to break the rules for good customers. And I thought for a minute, and I said, okay, given Sarbanes-Oxley and compliance, that ain't going to happen because you break the rules, you go to jail. However, if you redefine the rules at the issue level, for this issue, there are 4 ways you can handle it. Use your best judgment. Now, I can break the rules without breaking the rules. And you don't do this for everything, but for the top 5 difficult issues, you give people flexible solution spaces, and all of a sudden you will find your first contact resolution goes up dramatically.
Oh, I think the issue I run into, and I hear this with people working through this, is they want to give their folks latitude, and they want to be able to less rulely in their organization, but compliance and legal object so strongly to flexibility. And so, what's some ways of dealing with that?
Well, we've actually found that even in insurance companies where everything is a contract, in financial services, you do get legal and compliance are nervous. But to the degree that you say, look, we're building this flexibility, the solution space into the decision rules, and we have limits, we have boundaries, and as long as you're comfortable with anything we do within that is meeting the legal criteria, what's your problem? And so we basically get them involved in the development of the flexible solution space, but once they've signed off on it and blessed it, saying, yes, we're not going to get into any dramatic trouble there, then you can totally delegate that flexibility to the front line. So the big thing is to get them involved early, and as long as you take a reasonable person approach to the space, we find that that's not really very much of an issue. And we've done this in very legalistic environments. We even did it with the Federal Reserve, the board of the Federal Reserve, with the chairman of the Federal Reserve, in terms of their dealing with the public, where they said, well, you can't change what the word that, one word of what the chairman said. Well, you can have a plain English version of it and just have a footnote saying this is not, the legal position of the Federal Reserve, and they were happy with that. So you you can build this flexibility into literally any environment. Now, even if I have the flexibility, if I don't have the right information or the tools to execute, I'm still not going to be able to resolve easily on first contact. I have to know who you are. This is where CRM systems have now come into their own. The data is available on what your history is, who you are, whether you're a gold, silver, bronze, or lead customer, and I know with the flexible solution space, what can I do for a lead customer, what can I do for a gold customer. The one point I would raise is, in many cases, the gold customer is getting your best price and you've got all his revenue. Maybe the silver and bronze customers are the big opportunities. Maybe your silver customer is somebody else's gold customer, and if you just gave them gold service, you would get a lot more revenue. So we think in many cases, fawning over the gold customer is not the best idea. It's fawn over the silver and bronze customer, and in many cases, if you explain to the lead customer, here's what I can do to you, for $20 a month more, you can become a bronze customer. What would you like to do? I'm giving you options. All of a sudden, we find the lead customer can turn into a bronze or a silver customer. Also, you have to motivate the full team, not just the best person. We find in a lot of organizations, everybody has the employee of the month. If I'm a low performer, why bother trying? I'm never going to get that. The same three people always win. But if you recognize everyone, celebrate everyone with a victory session where you go around the room and each person gets to talk about the wackiest customer or toughest problem they successfully handled in the last month, then all of a sudden everybody gets positive recognition and you get a more highly motivated team. But the key point is prevention is the best strategy. You don't even want to handle the stuff if at all possible. The last point in the contact center is I mentioned earlier, you need to measure satisfaction and loyalty by type of contact. This is just an example from a well-known direct mail organization where if you had a routine order, 98% of people were happy. If it was on back order, a third of people were unhappy. That tells you need to come up with a better response rule for when something is on back order. Tongue partially in cheek, I suggested, okay, you wanted to order this Prada handbag, it's not in stock. The standard answer is, look lady, it's on a boat somewhere. That doesn't make the customer very happy. So I suggested, Luigi in Milan is not quite done with it. The customer's reaction was, oh, I realize these are handmade, you can't rush the artiste, I'm willing to wait. So by giving them pretty much the same answer, but with a little embroidery on it, we were able to get a 20-point lift in customer satisfaction. Now, how do we use voice of the customer across the company to really move from firefighting into prevention? The primary approaches are first to address the problems head on in welcome packages, emails, and calls. Warn the customer when something is going to happen. At Southern California Edison, they now are identifying whose bills are going to be significantly higher than they expect, looking at long-term data trends. And in one experiment, we sent emails to 30,000 customers 10 days into the billing period saying, your bill is going to be higher than you expect, and we're concerned. 54% of people opened that email, and we found a statistically significant change in customer behavior where they then started reducing their electricity usage. So the best defense is a good offense. Warn the customer in the welcome package or right up front what the potential unpleasant surprises are. Now, marketing hates that idea because we don't want to talk about problems. Interestingly, it's a delighter in that the customer says, wow, you cared enough to communicate to me. And in fact, in the SoCal Edison environment, satisfaction went up dramatically because people said, you've shown me you really care about helping me serve. You want to eliminate confusion on marketing officers. I mentioned the fine print on the auto warranty. Fine print and footnotes are the key to creating problems. Eliminate as many of those as possible. Have a website that has a living list of the 5 most prevalent calls you're getting in the contact center, and here's the answer. Don't put that 3 clicks in. Put it on the home page. And if you really want to do this the right way, you change that list each week predicated on what are the top 5 calls we got the week before. And what you will see is calls on those issues will go down because almost everybody now goes to the website before they actually go to the trouble of calling your contact center. You have a portal for new customers, so if you are a new customer, here are some short little videos that will show you how our product or service works. You also have to have a good website map. We find that almost no one pays much attention to improving the website map, but the website map is an index to everything I can find on your website. And as websites become more complicated, you need to have a good website map. And if it is, many more people will be willing to self-service. Also, you need to have proactive education on the phone. And again, this is my Hewlett-Packard example where HP would say in a polite way, you've asked me a dumb question. Have you tried looking at our website? Let me take you to the website and show you where you could have found that answer. And by the way, here's where you could have found the next answer. And again, they have found for every 2 minutes invested in that type of education, they save 10 minutes of subsequent phone calls. One thing not to do, CCMC does a biannual study of what causes customer rage in conjunction with Arizona State University. And one of the things that drives customers absolutely up a wall is when I am on hold waiting to talk to one of your reps, you have a message that says you can get faster service by going to our website. More than likely, I've already been to the website, and the last thing I want to hear is hang up and go to the website. That's a flash phrase you should never have on your hold message. Encourage questions before the customer gets into trouble. We tell them we can only solve problems we know about. And then, as I mentioned earlier, deliver psychic pizza. And this is providing people with confirmations, progress reports, and answer questions before they are asked. A great example of this is New Jersey Natural Gas, who has people going to people's homes to do repairs and installations. You've all stayed home waiting for the cable guy, and your standard behavior is at 4 o'clock the day before, you will call and you'll say, is he really coming? Then you'll call a second time at 8 a.m. and say, when is he coming? And if he hasn't gotten there by 11, you call a third time and say, is he really coming before noon? Because I got to get back to the office. What New Jersey Natural now does is, when they make the appointment, they identify what is your preferred channel of communication. Then at 2:30 the day before, they will send you a text or an email saying he's really coming tomorrow, and at 8:15 he'll call you and tell you where you are in the queue. At 8:15 he calls and he says you're fourth in the queue. It'll be 11 o'clock before I'm at your house, so as long as you're home by 10:30, we're cool. And he's just given you 2.5 hours of your life back, and they have saved and prevented 3 phone calls. So this is an example of delivering psychic pizza. Now, a team exercise you should do in your organization after this webinar is ask your staff to review from memory the complaints, the support contacts, the quality failures, and the workload that are highly repetitive contacts that would be preventable if it was better expectation setting or communication, or if it was just-in-time proactive communication a la New Jersey Natural Gas. Then select one of those. Size it in terms of how many 100 or 1,000 of those contacts do we get a month, and what would be a low-cost strategy for getting ahead of it. You will find this is one of the simplest ways of moving out of firefighting into prevention. And once you start getting your staff to be thinking that way, they will come to you and tell you, hey, here's another opportunity for delivering psychic pizza or preventing unnecessary contacts. Now, to become an internal consultant, you have to have finances on your side. And I recently did a survey of 160 customer experience and service strategy executives, and what I found was that about a third of them actually had an end-to-end unified picture of the customer experience. Those executives achieved twice the impact of the other executives because they had an end-to-end picture of the customer experience. Additionally, CFO buy-in is important. And I asked the question to these executives, does the CFO believe the business case made by your voice of the customer? And the possible answers were yes, somewhat, no. To the degree that the answer was yes, we found 40% of those VOC processes were very effective at getting things fixed. How do I define very effective? That 60% or more of the issues raised by the voice of the customer got fixed in a timely manner. We also found that 55% of those systems where the CFO bought in had major year-over-year increases in customer satisfaction. Where buy-in didn't exist, only 8% of companies had a very effective voice of the customer system, and only 23% had significant increases in customer satisfaction. The business case that you want the CFO to buy into is based on loyalty and revenue, margin, enhanced margin, word of mouth, and risk reduction. Now, one other point on this survey, I was somewhat appalled to find that 21% of the respondents, when I said what percentage of issues get fixed by the voice of the customer process, they said we have no idea what percent get fixed. If you're not keeping score, how do you know how effective your voice of the customer process is? Now, to build the economic model and get CFO buy-in, you basically need to understand what percentage of your customers have had a problem, what percent asked you, contacted your service system, and what percent are satisfied. And what you find is, and I'm actually going to try using the marketing system here, what you find is if people are satisfied, you will then find that their willingness to repurchase and willingness to recommend are in many cases actually higher than if they had no problem whatsoever. If they're dissatisfied, you see significant drops and a huge amount of negative word of mouth being produced. Now, this is certainly disturbing, but the most disturbing issue is that at a minimum in your environment, 75% of your customers aren't even telling you about where there is a problem, but you are having significant damage to loyalty and recommendation, and they are still spreading a lot of negative word of mouth out there. So what you need is to get at least an ad hoc snapshot of what your customer experience is in terms of how many people have had problems, how many have told you about those problems, and what the outcomes are depending on whether they've told you or not. Now, once you have that data, you're then in a position to build an economic model that the CFO can easily buy into. In this case, we've said 20% of customers have a problem. We have 1 million customers, so we now know that we have 200,000 customers who've had a problem. The rest of the data mirrors what you saw on the previous page, and if people they complain and are satisfied, we know that we're going to keep 90% of their loyalty, which means that we will have about 2,500 customers at risk. On the other hand, if they're dissatisfied, only 70% will repurchase. We have a 30% attrition, so we have 3,000 customers at risk there. The shocking finding that really gets CFO's attention is those who haven't complained are relatively loyal. Only 25% aren't repurchasing, but that is far and away the largest source of revenue hemorrhage. Now, at $1,000 per customer, we're basically saying this situation is putting $46 million at risk. Once we have that $46 million, that's how much money we're leaving on the table. There are 3 strategies we can pursue to enhance the bottom line. Strategy number 1 is prevention. Strategy number 2 is let's get more people to tell us about the problem. And strategy number 3 is let's improve the response. Now, in fact, this third strategy is the one that's most within your power, but if you have a good voice of the customer process, I would argue you also have a lot of potential for impacting on prevention. So once you have this, what we call it the tree diagram, you now have gotten the CFO's attention, because you're basically saying the status quo is costing us $46 million. You're then in a position to say, okay, there are three parameters that we can affect. One is how many customers have problems. The second is how many are telling us about those problems. And thirdly, how many people are we actually satisfying when they tell us. Now first, let's take a look at what happens if we improve resolution from 50% to 70% and we get more people to contact us. So rather than 25%, we have 40% of people complaining. We rerun the numbers and we now find we have 41,000 customers at risk. We have added $4.8 million to the bottom line. Now, because we're having more people contact, we're actually getting 30,000 more calls, and intuitively finance people say, well, the last thing we want is more calls. But if the customer's worth $1,000 and it costs you $10 to handle the call, you want to hear from all those unhappy customers. So even though we're handling 30,000 more calls, we're going to make $1.2 million in incremental profit at a 25% gross margin.
Now, John, do you have any advice on just actually calculating the value of a customer using 1,000 in your example? But is there any best practices around looking at that actual value of the customer?
Yeah, actually, most of the world is attached to the concept of lifetime value of the customer. Mm-hmm. And Carl Sewell wrote about that in Customers for Life, and he basically said the average Cadillac customer is worth $346,000 over a 20-year period. The problem we have with that is most finance guys say, you know, who knows if we're going to be in this business? Yeah, who knows if we're going to be in this business 20 years from now? So we basically find you should use 1 to 3 years of revenue from a customer, and don't go any more than that. And you should ask your finance people, what should the customer be worth? And if they say, well, we're happy to use 6 years of revenue, fine. That's your suggestion. We're going to use 3 years. So then when you do this presentation, the only criticism you get is, well, but the value of the customer is higher than that. You're understating the payoff. And then if you're being criticized by finance for being too conservative, you've carried the day.
Right.
Okay, now another... Yes, exactly. Another approach is to quantify the payoff for prevention. What if we took the 200,000 contacts and we reduced it to 150,000? What we find by rerunning the numbers is we now have only 34,000 customers to risk. We've added $11.5 million to the bottom line. And even if we spent $1 million on prevention at a 25% gross margin, we have an ROI of 187%. So the point here is that you can spend serious money investing in prevention, and by preventing the problem, you're going to have a lot less customers at risk. Now, a lot of those customers may be people you're not hearing from, but the fact you're not hearing from them doesn't mean they're not unhappy and going to spread negative word of mouth and go away. Which actually leads nicely into the next impact, which is word of mouth. If you're servicing 10,000 people a week and you are satisfying or delighting 90% of them, you are still leaving 10% of people dissatisfied, and they could be spreading as much as 6,000 cases of negative word of mouth. Now, the net impact across your 10,000 customers is positive, but you still have a lot of negative word of mouth, and there's a significant opportunity in trying to get this 10% down. Now, the other point to be made is to ask your chief marketing officer, is word of mouth important in our industry? And almost everyone will say, yes, it is important. Have we tried measuring it, and are we managing it? Well, no, we just put more money into advertising. Our contention is your service system, by servicing 10,000 people a week, is a word-of-mouth management process. And from the 10,000 positive referrals you're generating, if only 1 out of 30 people take action on that positive referral, you are generating 300 new customers a week. And I have an article in Brand Week that challenges chief marketing officers, ask the questions, is word of mouth important? Are you measuring it? How many of your customers come from positive word of mouth? So just send me an email at the end, ask me for a care package of articles, and I'll send you the Brand Week article, which will equip you to challenge your chief marketing officer on the impact that you're having on word of mouth, and that service is one of the best word of mouth management processes. Now, how do you integrate the data? Because I said at the beginning you had to have a unified picture of the customer experience from all the different data sources. This is an example from a consumer packaged goods environment where if you go to a sample of your customers and you say, have you had any problems? Did you complain? Where did you complain? In this case, we found that 1,000 CPG customers had a problem. About 10% of them complained somewhere, and we then said, where did you complain? And you find that 1% went to Facebook, 4% went to the local retailer, 5% called the consumer affairs department, and 4% went to the corporate 800 number, 5% went to the email, 4% called the 800 number. Once you have where people go when they have a problem, you're then in a position to interpret all your different touchpoint data and integrate it. Again, the way you gather this data is you go to a sample of your customers and say, have you had any problem? What problem did you have? Did you complain? Where did you complain? So those are 4 questions that you need to ask your customers. Once you have the fact that 5% sent an email and 4% went to the 800 number and 1% went to Facebook, you're now in a position to say, okay, we had 20 people came to Facebook, and we know that 1% goes there. That would imply 2,000 occurrences in the marketplace. We had 54 people came to the corporate 800 number, 4% called the 800 number. That would imply 1,350 instances in the marketplace. We had 2 people sent a nasty email to executives. 1 out of 750 does that. That would imply 1,500 instances in the marketplace. So we now have, from our 6 touch points, we have 6 different estimates of the number of instances in the marketplace. Now, this is dirty data. It doesn't fit together perfectly, but you, by taking an average of them, can say, based on 6 different touch points, our best guess is 1,300 people had this problem. Having this problem does 25% damage to loyalty. The average customer is worth $200. So the 20 Facebook mentions and the 54 calls on the 800 number and the 3 tweets actually imply $66,000 in revenue damage per month. So you can take your fragmentary contact data and convert it into significant estimates of revenue damage. Again, we have a working paper that describes how this is done in more detail. Just contact me and I'll send you a care package. Now, one other thing that really gets CFO's attention is to make the point that if people have problems, it makes them more sensitive to price. This is data from a banking environment where we basically ask people, have you had any problems, and are you satisfied with our prices and fees? So in this case, what we basically found was that people have had no recent problem, only 10% of them are dissatisfied with the fee. If they've had 1 recent problem, sensitivity to price doubles. If they have 2 problems, it doubles again. Now you're in the position of, for what I'm paying, I shouldn't be having these problems. So the message to finance is, if you want to have robust premium margins, you better give the customer great service and quality. Now, to enhance the reports and the impact of your voice to the customer and move from firefighting to prevention, you have to have a conservative value of customer and word of mouth. Pick 3 issues. Eliminate the masses of data requiring interpretation. One thing that Colgate-Palmolive does that is really very effective is they tailor the report to each function. Rather than having a 2-distribution report, a single report, they have a separate report tailored to the function. And then, to quote Chip Horner from Colgate, I have a meeting with each person and I look in their eyes to see if they've absorbed it. It's more labor intensive, but you're going to have a lot more impact. You also provide your client, your internal client, with an action plan and offer to help them to pilot test it. Mary Ellen Burris at Wegmans will tell an operating area, you have this issue and I'm happy to work with you to test this fix. Then she lets them get the credit. You want to humanize the data with quotes and recordings. To know that we had 85 of these is troubling, but to hear the recording and the angst in someone's voice dramatically humanizes the impact. Also, you don't criticize people. You don't tell a department, boy, did you make a mess. You basically say you're doing a great job, but look how much money you're leaving on the table. Greed is a great motivator. Now, this same approach can be used with all these departments. Marketing and brand is interested in retention and word of mouth. Finance wants enhanced margins and lower cost. Operations wants less rework. Quality wants reduced customer error and innovative fixes. Your channel partner management wants less complaints to the channel because you lose shelf space. Risk, warranty, legal and regulatory and insurance want reduced claims and lawsuits and regulatory interventions. HR wants happier frontline employees, and the employees are not happy if customers are chewing on them on problems. And product development and market research are looking for ideas for innovation. Your voice of the customer process can make you the primary source and go-to person for all these departments. So, at this point, you should go out this evening, get a glass of wine, and then evaluate your voice of the customer and prevention process based on these 10 factors, which are basically the ones I went through. I'm not going to read them all to you right now. Give yourself a 1 to 10 on each of those. To the degree that you have less than a 75 overall, you are wasting at least 15% of your service budget. So hopefully I've stimulated your thinking in a number of areas. You need to understand the full range of causes of problems, create a unified voice of the customer to identify the opportunities for prevention, create the economic imperative to get the finance people to give you the resources by quantifying the revenue and word-of-mouth impact of not only the problems you're hearing about, but the unarticulated problems. Take control of the voice of the customer and then become the chief customer officer, and leverage your technology to proactively educate, connect, explain, and deliver psychic pizza. So hopefully I've stimulated your thinking in a number of areas. All this is covered in much more detail in strategic customer service. And if you send me an email to jgoodman@customercaremc.com, I'll be happy to send you the care package of articles that I've talked about. Alicia, we ran a couple of minutes long, but hopefully that stimulates people's thinking.
Oh, this is great. We could talk about this kind of stuff all day. I was thinking about an executive I was talking to a couple days ago, one of our board members, and he moved into a new role, and his title is Chief Customer Success Officer. And I think that kind of all sums it up. We were really trying to help those customers be successful and using the products and services we have and find ways to make sure we're doing it right and they're doing it right. So this is great. I'm looking forward to having you with us in November and learning more. So if you missed John's first presentation, the webinar that we did, which had to do with how to sell it, all this finance folks, so it goes into more detail about how to present all this information to finance. We got a little taste of that here, but there's more. In the earlier webinar, you can go to our website, which I have for you right here, and I'll read it for those who are listening. It's WPCarey, WTCarey.asu.edu/CSL, and our Twitter handle is @WPCCSL. Our email address is csl@asu.edu, and our phone is 480-965-6201. So you're definitely going to want to reach out to John and get that care package, and you're going to want to go to Amazon and get the book that's out right now, which is Strategic Customer Service, and be watching for the book Customer Experience 3.0, which is coming out this spring. And hopefully we'll see you also at the symposium. And John, do you want to give your contact information and your Twitter handle again one more time so they can know how to reach you?
Great. It's jgoodman@customercaremc.com, and my Twitter handle is jgoodman888. So I try tweeting at least once a week about either a paper we've generated, or a new study that we have found.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much again for another great session, and we'll see you in November.
Great. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. Bye-bye.